Path of Exile 2 just announced some pretty big changes that are coming in a mid-league patch here. We've got new chase items, new socketables, changes to in-game mechanics, and one stat, which let's see if you can get it right. There is one thing in the game in particular that has accounted for over half of all player deaths. Okay, so we're going to go over that one as well as a lot of changes, things like Citadel spawning, and it's just actually a fairly large patch. So let me break down the highlights for you. So one of the first things they address here is effectively chase items, like items in the game that are extremely strong. Things like Astromintus come in mind, or Headhunter, for instance. You know, items that you really log into the game to attempt to acquire. Now, they say they want these to be, rare and powerful, but also acquirable. So they said here they've set the frequency of encounters and rewards. We have decided to see how many maps players will have to do in order to get them. After extensive playtesting, we believe that we've overshot this number substantially. Effectively, they don't believe that it is, as acquirable as they would like it to be for these chase uniques. But also, on top of it, they believe that they don't have enough of these types of items as well. So they say the major focus of this is making chase items more common, but also adding more of these items as well to chase. So the result of this is then basically significantly improving both the drop rates of these incredibly rare unique items, so you actually have a chance at acquiring some of these, plus adding a bunch of new and exciting chase uniques that will bring your builds to new heights. One of the common complaints since the beginning of the game, and honestly in PoE 1 as well, was that a lot of the uniques are not very useful, and some of them are incredibly useful. Like Mage Blood is almost one of those items you just slot into like almost every build, for instance. So they're trying to add more uniques kind of on that type of level, but actually make it more acquirable for you, so you don't just have to play for 1 billion hours and get 100 billion divines in order to get these. These are still going to be rare, obviously, because they are chase items, but at least they are somewhat realistic. Also, they say some of the unique items that were intended to be chased didn't really kind of fall into that line, so some of the ones that are more mid that they think should be stronger are getting buffed as well to kind of live up to that more chase unique standard, and you should see significantly more chase uniques, and they're going to do a post showing of some of the new uniques this week, or I should say next week. So we're going to have a new list of these, and we'll go through them when they come out. They also sort of mention here socketables. So, for instance, like the runes that go in that basically people just do for resistances or early game, maybe attributes in order to solve some attribute issues. And they don't really think that these are fulfilling, an interesting crafting solution. This was sort of the replacement to their crafting bench. So what they're doing here is ideally you want to be swapping out these like resistance and attribute ones for more powerful and interesting mods later on in the game. So they say in the 0.2.1 update, the one we're talking about here, they're going to add 22 new runes, 14 new soul cores, and 7 new talismans, and these cover a full spectrum from being powerful to insane, but are rare to find. So now we're kind of fitting again these, chase items, only these would be chase runes, and you would certainly want to use them over the normal base of socketables. Probably a pretty good addition in terms of being able to modify your build a little bit. I think more or less things are just like iron runes, and iron runes are pretty rare. It kind of feels like the moment, at least it feels like that for me. So it's like iron runes and the heavy energy shield type of gear, just to make sure you get more energy shield, or resistances if you need resistances. And those are maybe I'll use the HP ones on a warrior like Smith of Catawba, where I don't need our resistances. So there's not really too many, socketables that I feel like are too impactful currently. Then they mention omens here. So there's an issue with the rarer omens need to be more common. So they say you see the same number of omens, but you have significantly, again, they use the word significantly, higher probability of being the rarer, more exciting ones. I'm assuming they're mentioning ones like Omen of Whittling, perhaps, like the omens that you're actually using to actually attempt to craft some gear here. They're also increasing the commonality of corrupted essences when you use the Val Orbs. And Rogue Exiles are getting 3 times as many unique items. So they started to mention here some of the in-game mechanics, for instance, Twisted Domain. This is like, the breach stone after you collect all the splinters from the breaches. And they say that the end boss is like pretty valuable, but the rest of it's pretty underwhelming. Like the portion where you're killing the mobs up right before the boss. So what they're doing is they're increasing the number of the rare mobs that spawn here, making it where at the end, the large drop of items that occur before the boss fight are way more valuable than they were previously. And they're also guaranteeing some rare breach rings as well. Breach rings were definitely gutted in this recent patch to be way less common than they were in 0.2 One, they're now extremely less common, so I just don't have very many of these, regardless of playing a lot of Breach. You know, you get them, it's just like I say, they're very rare now. So they're actually guaranteeing at least some rare ones, and the drops in general will be better at when you're farming Breaches, or I should say the Breach Stone boss, after you have been farming Breaches, because they think, you know, why would the normal Breaches in the maps be more valuable than the actual Breaches in the boss map, which makes sense. Okay, now this one's kind of interesting because Expedition, in my opinion, is in a pretty decent state. Like, I think it's probably the best mechanic, but to be fair, that's because some of the other mechanics have been kind of underwhelming lately. So because of this, I was surprised to see Expedition is actually getting a buff and a pretty decent one. So let's break down what's going on here. So one of the first things they're doing is looking at experience. They say that basically you're not even getting 1% of the level of experience you need in the low level 90s. So they're going to be kind of adjusting the monster spawning to intensify the combat by focusing on very high level ones to better match the consistency of other in-game content. AKA, they want you to actually get experience from farming these maps. They're going to start by giving you a longer range and width of the explosion, so that way you will get more mobs, but they're also increasing the number of mobs. And they're doing some changes for each one of the different areas from the logbooks. Now, this one was surprising to me. The Lush IO is the one that kind of has those yellow chests that you can blow up, and then you get a big kind of explosion of orbs. And I thought maybe they would eventually go in and like nerf this or something, just based upon previous behavior of how they're happening when something's really good. It seems like kind of nerfed, but they're actually kind of buffing this, which is what is interesting. They're making it even better. They're increasing the number of remnants, which will effectively be more mobs, again, for more experience. There's also going to have corrupted monsters that can spawn on death here. And then on top of it, on the base monsters, except they're being increased, they're actually increasing more remnants, and the ones particularly that increase your experience as well. They want Lush IO to be a bit like Untamed Paradise. They basically want you to have very good experience from this map in particular. But the one that interests me here is, additionally, we will generate more of the fenced off sections. Now, they say the fenced off areas where you explode the fence, gain access to tomes, drop a lot of currency. They're going to generate more of these, and within this area also is where you're going to have these corrupted monsters. But the fenced off areas is where you actually get all of, you know, the extreme orbs. I don't know if this means that just the area itself is going to be bigger, or if they are actually adding in more of the horde chests. If they are, then this is going to be a very juicy expedition area. The logbooks will be even better. They say the frigid bluffs logbook, however, is very underwhelming. It's not even as rewarding as normal expedition mobs. And here's where it gets interesting. So what they're doing is, on top of the monsters, we're now going to have some Vow bosses frozen in ×2. These are standalone map bosses that can be broken out and fought, and all the remnant modifiers will apply to them as well. So you can basically juice the quantity and, you know, quality and, you know, the rarity, all these different things here of the bosses themselves on this map, which is doubly interesting because they're reworking the remnant that basically makes it where items drop corrupted, and instead now generates 1 to 3 upsides and 1 to 3 downsides that normal remnants have. Think of them as super remnants, so you can super juice these. Between these two logbooks alone, I'm sure we're going to, you know, see like a pretty substantial increase in loot. Particularly, I'm curious to see whether or not the map bosses or the Vow bosses here are actually juiced by the map boss from the Atlas, because if so, the map boss loot modifiers tend to be pretty good, and we were already seeing like a lot of loot come from the map bosses. So this does have the potential to be kind of crazy. And now this one is interesting. So the Barren atoll logbook is a atoll that sea travelers and fishermen have used to store their treasure and supplies. They want this area to be strong boxes, golden runes. Particularly the Ezomite runes, the runes that are like kind of the more, you know, rare ones from the unique map. Here's the interesting one. We're going to generate a lot more strong boxes, and by a lot, I mean over 10 times as many, of which unique strong boxes too. So you're going to get, you know, basically a shitload of strong boxes from these maps. So this might be a good way to attempt to target farm like the Vinter's strong box, for instance. The runes that are being dropped instead of 1 go to 2 to 4. And they say because they're adding new chase rune drops, this could be a good source to actually get them. So, you know, Expedition getting buffed again was not on my bingo card, and this means Expedition is even better as, you know, than it currently stands. And I think, you know, currently it's probably the best thing to farm, because also the Recombinator is pretty crazy, particularly early in the league. So you have, you know, you have a pretty good handful of reasons here to do Expedition in this upcoming patch. They're making changes to the in-game, and the first one here they're making is that map generation is going to be more, randomized. Currently, they say if they generate 400,000 maps, 150,000 of them would be hitting Grotto, which is like kind of a wild number. They say the intention here is to normalize the frequency from different maps and thus the boss fights. They don't want it to feel as repetitive doing the same maps. Okay, and then this is actually a fairly large change here, the Citadel spawning. So I was talking about this previously in my last video, if you remember, where we did the Citadel race event that I hosted with prizes and all that, race to Arbiter. And what we found out from that is that the RNG associated with Citadels is too much, that even with racers, it has way too big of a gap. We're talking hours, like massive gaps. So the difference in Citadel spawning is so RNG to the point that a standard player could have a 100-hour difference or more, to the next standard player and when they actually get their Citadels. And because of this, the average player may literally spawn into a situation in the Atlas where they're just basically never going to get to face the Arbiter, which is unfortunate, particularly because of the changes to boss fights, where on the lowest tier of Arbiter, you just get basically infinite runs until you actually get it down. So because of this, the system is designed in a way that once you have the boss fights, the average player gets to play until they beat it, but you don't actually get to get the fragments, forcing them to have to farm the fragments, meaning there's so much demand for these things, the prices are expensive, and the average player just basically never either gets the money to afford the fragments or the chance to actually, find the fragments for themselves. This can be frustrating not only for that, but also for SSF, where you can find 2 out of 3 of the Citadels and then farm for like a week and still not find that last Citadel. So they're addressing this here, which is Citadel spawning has been adjusted. Now whenever a Citadel is generated on the Atlas, it also ensures that it generates the other 2 types of Citadels near it. So you're guaranteed, you see one Citadel, you see them all. Basically, you're going to be able to get 3 of them there. This will prevent cases where we've been seeing where players would, due to the whims of random generation, get many of the same Citadels one after another, and never be able to fight the Arbiter Ash, especially when not in a trade league. This is actually a very large change to being able to do the in-game Arbiter boss. If you can find one, and you can sniff out the other 2 will be right there. This is a very good change, in my opinion, here as well, okay? Say both these changes to Atlas layouts won't apply to areas you've already revealed. In order to get the improvements, you need to explore further into the parts of Atlas that haven't been generated yet. So you're going to have to go into the fog to find your next new Citadel in the fog. When you do, boom, that's going to have this new generation here. They say additionally, you can expect some other in-game improvements, such as reducing the danger of the 2 ritual types that were just ruckuses of purple explosions, and reducing the danger, increasing the telegraphing of volatile plant monster modifiers. Combine these responsible for over half of all player deaths in the game. Okay, half of the player deaths in the game were to volatile plants. So if you're feeling like you're remember, I don't know if you guys watch my stream or not, but a large time I've said multiple times, I feel like the majority of my game is dodging this purple shit, and I thought I was kind of just bitching, but it's over half of all player deaths in the game. That is an outrageously high number. If you're dealing with half of player deaths in the game to one type of modifier, in my opinion, there is something wrong with that modifier, because this is a massive outlier. So the fact that this is getting addressed will make the quality of just mapping and the annoyance of having to deal with this significantly improved. We're also lowering some of the most dangerous modifier map types, like elemental penetration, to be more in line with others, improving the rewards and visibility of omens of the Viridian unique map. Yeah, this one felt terrible. Increasing the radius to get open clasped hands and breaches, reducing the pack size of bats that shotgun you with projectiles in the Twisted Domain, and reworking the cursed map mods to have counterplay. These are just some of the more isolated improvements incoming. So this one right here, rewards and visibility of the unique map, is great because that one doesn't feel very rewarding, but also this one, lowering the commonality of these like elemental penetration, or lowering some of the more dangerous map modifiers to be more in line with others. This would be nice because I feel like a lot of these, I play a lot of hardcore, but a lot of the map modifiers I find that are dangerous are just very common. So you get a lot of elemental penetration, continually. And that's basically just a tax. It feels like a 15% tax or something on just having to sell waystones that are basically unrunnable if you don't want to die. And even if you're not playing hardcore, if you're playing softcore, I've seen complaints about losing experience. And a lot of time, if you're just blindly like just clicking on a map and go, you're not reading them, like the penetration is probably what is killing you. That, or massive amounts of increased extra damage and monster damage can kill you, or even additional projectiles, though it's not as dangerous as these other mods. So for that reason, lowering the dangerous of this is kind of, good for everyone involved here as well. It would just be a little bit less of a tax. Okay, so now moving on to the trials here. In trials of the second mods, we've adjusted the affliction that causes you to have no energy shields instead of have a half your energy shield. Because what would happen is you could RNG into one of these, and that's unavoidable, or you get as a random affliction, and because of that, the run is now over and you have to leave. So they don't like that, so it's adjusting that to half, so you still have a chance. On top of this, we discovered a mistake with a chance to gain certain afflictions and boons. Specifically, there was one affliction, 2 minor boons, 1 major boon, and 1 pact that had 100 times the commonality that they should have. 100x. Okay, more common than they should have. This would have caused players to be constantly getting them as first randomly generated outcome, and as these boons were in particular the weaker and more boring ones, like honor, etc., it often would have made the runs less rewarding and interesting. So basically, trial is going to be better there because that mistake is getting fixed. So moving on to quality of life. Now in the passive tree, when you're searching for something, instead of having to look for it, you can basically Control F and just hit enter and go through it, and it's automatically going to take you right to that node. It also darkens the rest of the passive tree to help you be able to see it easier. So this is going to be much easier in searching for to find certain passives. Okay, now here's a pretty big one. They're reverting the tiers. So now instead of tier 13 or whatever being the highest, tier 1 is truly the highest. So lower equal better. When you have a tier 1 affix on your item, you now know that is the highest affix an item can get, instead of guessing, can this one get tier 9 or tier 10 or tier 11 or tier 12 or even tier 13, which I didn't even know existed. So then you have a much easier readability of the item. This was originally the way it was in PoE 1, but they swapped in PoE 2 for some reason, so they have just swapped this back. Some readability for the Atlas for map modifiers, performance upgrades, and some improvements to the shop and cosmetic panels. When is this coming? They say deploy at the end of next week, so within, 9 days, somewhere around that. All in all, some surprising changes, like flipping of the tiers, a lot more buffs than I was expecting for a mid-league league patch, and also the focus on being able to actually acquire chase uniques instead of kind of pretending they don't exist until either you have a ton of currency and can buy whatever you want, or you just randomly chance orb one out of 3,000 times. That is a nice change as well. And I'm glad we're adding more chase things like chase runes, chase uniques, because you need something to actually attempt to acquire currently in the game. I feel like it's, fairly easy to get the uniques you actually need. Like there isn't, other than buying rare items that are, perfectly, RNG to have good stats or something, I don't feel like there's too much that you would actually either save up for or attempt to acquire. I'm playing SSF, so it's like when I'm playing the game, there's not really anything I'm looking for other than chance orbs to maybe try to hit a headhunter or something again, because that's just the only really chase unique. There's not really any boss drops that I really care about that much. So we'll have to see the list of new uniques coming to the game, where we can acquire those uniques, and the changes to the previous uniques before we get more information on this. But I like the concept of having more chases. All in all, pretty healthy, solid patch, particularly around things that we have seen come up. And I know I've been playing the game. I'm still, in here playing this game. All right, the last few days I've been playing Tarkov, but I've been, grinding a lot of this game, and a lot of these are issues that are continually arising, as I play more and more and more of the same league. I've really been experiencing a lot of these, particularly that volatile plant's death. Being over half of the player death doesn't surprise me that much now that I think about it, because I spend a majority of my time dodging them. Plus, when you get, decently tanky, those feel like the only thing that can really kind of, chunk you down. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want more information, and I'll see you on the next video, boys.